Hi everyone, Pickles here, and today I'll be sharing with you my Lianorn deck list for post-festival collection, and this is just my take on Lianorn for the new meta, so I'm excited to share with you. Let's just jump into the ride line. First we're going to be starting with the Rorowa for our starter. You need to be running the Rorowa if you want to be running the grade 1 that we'll be showing, so you can't just run any grade 0 you want, unfortunately. The grade 1 of course is the Rorowa that gives you a token. So once you ride this one over this one, you will get a token, usually to be placed in the back row center column. This is really nice because you make a 13k column early if you go second, and if you go first, it's just nice to have a booster so you can have a full board. Also, it activates one of your other cards. However, we're not going to be continuing with the rural ride line at this point. For our grade 2, we're going to be running the Black Tears Husk Dragon. So this is the Zorga grade 2 that allows you to put a normal order from your drop into your hand. This allows your normal orders to be used as a pseudo cycler so that you can discard them and get them back. Either that or you can use them on turn 1 and then also get them back for turn 2. Our deck is also geared towards this, so we made some space for some orders. And of course our grade 3 is going to be the OG Lianorn. So this card of course gets triple drive, also boosts with 3 units, and can draw a card, call a card for a CB. Overall a good card. This is our total ride line. I think it works really well. I think it's consistent. You don't always have to hit on the dragon. You don't lose automatically because you didn't get an order. So it's just kind of a plus, but it's actually pretty consistent. And you mulligan for it. So that's our ride line. Going to the main deck, we'll start with our 4 copies of Lianorn Vivace. So Vivace is how I pronounce it. You may pronounce it differently. This card, if you don't know, it costs 1 CB, and you're able to restand 3 units. And of course this includes the Vanguard, or it could be other units. Its other effect is kind of like a Final Rush kind of state effect, where you once you ride it, you enter into the Unison Dress state, and you draw a card. So you can also, once you Persona Ride with this card, you end up drawing 2 cards. So that's a really strong part of it. The other thing it does is when it restands the 3 rear guards, it gives them 5k. That's just the extra power that the whole front row gets. So it's not just that you restand the whole front row potentially, you also get an extra 5k. The whole deck is geared towards riding this card and making the most out of its turns, because effectively it has 3 drive checks, 6 attacks, 7 attacks potentially, and puts a lot of pressure on your opponent. So we run it at 4 copies, unlike the old builds where you would run it at 2 to 3, because now this is our main game plan. We're not running any of the Mask Engine. So that's going to be 4 Vivaces. The next card we're going to run is Resonance Dragon. So Resonance Dragon makes its way back into the deck. This is a multi-attack extender for the deck. So if you've boosted 5 or more times this turn, then this card can CB1 and go into Soul, and then choose a rearguard and stand it. This is restricted to Lianorn, of course. Its other effect is if you boosted a total of 3 or more times, it gets 5k. So this card can actually get quite big, and when boosted with a 15k, it's a 28k column, for example, and it allows you to do a 7th attack on your Vivace turn, or it allows you to do a 4th attack on your regular Lianorn turn. My only problem with this card, and the reason you either don't want to run it or want to run it at low copies, is because it doesn't plus. It's just sometimes feels underwhelming to extend in a deck where you already do 6 attacks, where you can be using that CB and that spot for a card that pluses. However, our build specifically needs this card to have its maximum combo. So we are going to be seeing it at 2 copies. So the next card in our deck is going to be a grade 2. It's going to be Luster Impact Dragon. Luster Impact is one of the best archetype-specific grade 2s that we have. Its first skill is actually generic. Surprisingly, if you have 2 or more back row grade 1 or less rears, this unit gets boosted 5k. Every game I play with this deck, or every time I play this in a deck, people ask me like about the effect. Is it restricted? It's not really that restricted in any way. The first effect, you just get a 15k booster, and that makes a 20k column with a token. So this card is extremely good. Its other effect is cost of Soul Blast, which we're happy to pay because not a lot of cards in the deck actually use Soul. But it gets another 5k if your Vanguard is at least 33k power, and you draw a card. That's really easy to get on Vivace, because Vivace usually is like 60 to anywhere from 60 to 100k power. The regular Lianorn, you have to make sure you get your power, but if you have him plus Lianorn already makes 28. So if you have 2 other plant tokens, then yeah, you're good, pretty much. So that's pretty much it for Lesser Impact. He's mandatory for the full combo as well. Just because he's the biggest by himself, it's a unit that is just 20k and can boost. So it's one of our pretty much our biggest booster, and we need it for our full combo play, which we're going to talk about later. The next card in the deck is we run Broccoli. So Friendly Broccoli, a really good addition from the new set, from DZBTO2. It costs a Counterblast to draw a card if you have a plant token. So the initial plant token that we get off our ride line actually yields us advantage later. It's not restricted to turn 3 or anything. You use it on turn 2, you draw a card. And its other effect is that if you have a plant token continuous on your opponent's turn 2, it gets 5k power and 5k shield if you have a plant token. So that one plant token that you have is allowing you to use this card. It unlocks this card. You already wanted to play the plant token, but it unlocks this card. It lets you draw cards. This is a 10k shield, which comes up a lot. And I love it at 2 because it doesn't clog your hand for the late game. This is not part of your full combo late game. But at 2, it gives you that extra resilience and rush, and you can make 30k columns much easier. You have this with a dragon. That's a 30k column. So that's Broccoli for you. The next card in our deck is going to be the Sea Rumble Brave Shooter from the new set. Well, it's not the newest set, but it's the new series, DZBTO1. So this wasn't in Lianorn decks before, but I think having it at 2 is really comfortable. You still activate the effect enough times. And to be honest, this deck is very free on counterblasts because of Elentis that we're going to be talking about later. One of the counter charges that we have makes the deck really free, so you'd actually mostly use counterblast for this, and you'd rather Energy Blast 7 to draw a card in this deck. So you end up drawing a lot of cards because of that combo, but you don't want to clog yourself with these because you have a lot of good units with very archetype specific effects. So I think that having exactly 2 Brave Shooter feels really good for the moment. You could have an argument for 3 though, for sure. So the next card that we're playing is a staple in Lianorn, I think, at Rosarium Ferry. This card is part of our early game, part of our mid game, part of our late game. Mid game going second, but definitely mandatory for the late game, 1 to 2 copies. So because you want to use 1 to 2 early and 1 to 2 later, you need 4 copies of this card. You need to see it. What it does is it can pop a rear guard on place to call 2 plants. So you can pop that back row rear and make 2 plants go anywhere. 2 plants to the front, 2 plants make a column. So it's really easy to make tri-lane with this, just this single card. However, it's actually used usually to make 3 13k columns on turn 1 or 2, so that you can push your opponent for 10k shield because they just don't have 10k shield. Its second effect is if your opponent's Vanguard is grade 3 or greater, so that's when you're going second or anytime you're on Vivace, because if you're on Vivace, your opponent's definitely grade 3. Then it's going to copy a unit's power in the back row and add it to itself. So whatever power Fairy's at is its power, right? Like it could be 8, it could be 13, it could be 18 or whatever. And if it chooses a 20k in the back row, it just gets added. And that's incredibly strong. Also, it's not restricted to like not being boosted. So let's say this card is boosted by the card that it's adding power from, then it doubles that power and adds it to itself. So, excuse me, but yeah, that's kind of doubling effects in a game are not always balanced, I would say, because the more the energy you put into putting power in that back row rear guard, the more it doubles. Like the more power you get out of it. This thing will just keep stacking it. And if you have 1 back row rear and 2 fairies, then both of the fairies will copy that 1 back row and just get bigger and bigger and bigger. That includes getting triggers, putting it on that back row rear guard. So this card overall is definitely, again, part of your full combo, and we have to discuss that later. Another good one we run is really, really strong for the deck. I mean, I think the reason people underestimate this card is because it's not like a grade 3 or something, but it might as well be like an Inlet Pulse Dragon, because Elentis, it's not just, it has Painkiller Angel's effect for free, right? So if you have Unison Dress, well, if you boosted 3 or more times, basically, that's the second effect, then you can retire it and draw a card. So first of all, it's a free Painkiller, no Soul Blast needed. That would have already been good. if you damage zone doesn't have any face-up cards, you actually countercharge a card. So it's a CC painkiller that's free. And the second effect is that if you have Lianorn, you get plus 2k, and if you're in Unison Dress, you get plus 5k. So you're either a 10k attacker or booster, or a 13k attacker or booster. This thing is absolutely loaded. There's no restriction on if you could activate more than one per turn for the draw effect. So in theory, you could have a board of 4 Elentises, or 3, and you would draw that many cards. They would all pop, and you would draw that many cards. And you would maximum countercharge a total of 1 time. So I run this at 4 because it makes the deck super free, it makes the deck super bulky, super tanky, able to clear board against Shiranui, able to clear board against any deck that would manipulate the board. This gives you so much power. It's actually 13k on Unison Dress is pretty big. I mean, the dragon is 15k to start, so it's only 2k less than the dragon. This could be a really good target, especially if you beef it up with some power in the way that we're going to be talking about when we talk about our little package here. So far I think that's pretty standard, all the cards that I showed. And maybe the ratios are not standard, but that's because we need to make space for the rest of these cards in our deck. So I'll introduce what I think is one of the best cards made recently for Lianorn, and that's Fairy, a Flower Nectar Coutier. I'm going to go over this effect because every little detail about it is really important. So when it's placed on rear from hand, that's the first important part. You cannot revive this card, you can't top 7 Mythiarch it, so that's really important to keep in mind. You have to play it from hand. If you did not play an order this turn, discard a card, search your deck for up to 1 order card without Regalis Piece, discard it, and this card can be placed from drop, and when it would be put into the drop after being played, put on the bottom of the deck, and then shuffle the deck if you put it before you put it on the bottom. This card allows you to search any normal order in your deck that isn't a Regalis Piece. So you can tech one of orders basically in your whole deck that will be used at different parts of the game, and instead of having those like more copies of those orders, you just have a grade 1 that tutors any of them. That is also a grade, like it's a grade 1. So in this deck specifically, we have a booster that can always be used. It tutors any order from your deck. It's not a grade 3, right? So you can use it as early as turn 1. And it also discards a card. And discarding a card actually helps in this build. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to leave the coutiers on top while I talk about our order lineup, so that it gives a bit of context in what I think like explains the ratios in the deck. So I have 5 orders. The first of which is going to be Caliburn. The second is Nectar of Sensationalism. The third order is Mythiarch Habitat. The fourth is the Insertion of an Ideal Far Away. And the last order is Rousing Rasp. So I thought I'd show them all just to show you that like I have 5 normal orders in the deck, and I have 3 coutiers. I think that this ratio allows you to actually see and access whatever order you want pretty much all the time, because you have 3 copies of any order plus the 4th copy of that order. So it's almost like having 4 of every order except for Caliburn. Caliburn is a Regalis piece, so it can't be searched. However, Caliburn is a new order. It allows you to play it and draw 2 or CC 1. The CC is if you see it on your kill turn. I have not used it in all of my games of testing because there's not that much CB in this deck. So it's just a draw 2. That draw 2 helps you a lot to extend in the early game. So let's say you on turn 3 when you're kind of like weak, you need to discard for Lianorn, you need to discard for Ride, you need to discard for so many things. Then this card just gives you a draw 2, and it really helps you stabilize. Also, it's usable with your Ride line. So because it's usable with your Ride line, you're incentivized to like mulligan for this, and you actually find it a lot of the time. The other 4 orders are searchable off Coutier. This would be Nectar, which is our full combo card. So yes, this deck is a Nectar deck now, because Nectar is super synergistic with this deck. The whole idea that we're going to get into later is abusing the Fairy to copy power, and also the Dragon to restand the Fairy. This card needs at least 15 drop to be very good. It needs at least 10 drop to be good. So if you can give 10k to a unit, any unit, that's pretty strong. If you can give 15k and a crit to a unit, or 20k and a crit to a unit, then it becomes insanely good, because you can make that unit restand many times. So this is part of our full combo. And I'll be briefly showing later what I mean by this specific card. Mythiarch Habitat was a card that we used to run at 4 copies. Now we can run it at 1 copy. Coutier essentially says that if I play it on turn 1, I can discard a card, and then I can get Mythiarch from my deck and put it in my drop zone. Then I activate Mythiarch from my drop zone, and I call a card. That could be a fairy, so I can make a tri-lane really easily. But then the Mythiarch goes back on the bottom of the deck. So I still have the Mythiarch. My other Coutiers are alive, and if ever I draw that Mythiarch, then I can also use it again. So you don't actually need to run more than one Mythiarch in this deck. If you open it, that's pretty good, because you can use it with your red line. If you don't open it, but you open Coutier, that's pretty good. If you open another order, that's also good. So yeah, we run one Mythiarch, and it's loopable. I see an argument for running two, but I'd rather run these other orders, and I'll explain why. So In Search is a super versatile card that just says when other units attack, you can choose one of your units, and when other units attack, it gets 5k, and that stacks. So you can put this on a back row rear, and on your Vivace turn, because your front row attacks 6 times, then that stacks 6 times, because the back row rear itself doesn't attack. So every time the front row attacks, it's going to get a stack of 5k power. So you can get plus 30. If you attack 7 times, it's plus 35 on one of your units, and that power can be, of course, copied by your fairies. The other thing you could do is you can put it on Van, and of course the first swing on Van is always huge, so it doesn't matter, but the second swing on Van will have a plus like 30k potentially, or plus 20k, and that could be really strong because your Vanguard's usually a bit weaker. So this can give you a lot of power on Van, especially if you miss Persona Ride, but usually it's used to give power to a back row. It can also be used to just beef up a front row because you're doing 4 other attacks on your Vivace turn, so that's still going to give 4 stacks. Yeah, so I think this card is super versatile, worth it, and you only run 1 copy, so if you brick on it, you just discard it. You don't always use it. And it's much stronger than Nectar when you don't have the cards in drop for Nectar, which doesn't always happen, but it might. So if you don't have the cards in drop for Nectar, let's say you have like 10 cards in drop and you don't really want to turbo out another 5 cards in drops so you don't minus too much, you can just go and search, and it'll probably roughly do the job, and then you can just Nectar on the next turn. That's a pretty funny phrase. The last order we have is Rousing Rasp. I think this one is more specific to Zorga. It's like better to mill in Zorga, but this card actually allows you to search Vivace, because it says play CB1, look at top 5 cards of your deck, choose up to 1 card with grade greater than or equal to your Vanguard. So let's say you use it on turn 2 or 3, you can find Vivace off this, and I just thought that was a really cool use of a card, especially because you do have the counterblast. Sometimes you have 2 CB up, you have Lianorn's grade 3 skill to draw 1, and then you don't have any way to use another counterblast, but you have the countercharger, so this card's actually free sometimes, and it's going to get you a card usually, and if it gets you the Vivace that you didn't have, that probably wins you the game. Like, that might just win you the game, because if you don't have the Vivace, you probably have a bunch of other good cards, and you're just missing the Vivace. So this card unbricks you, and I'd rather have a card that unbricks me than any other card, because Mythiarch doesn't unbrick you from not having a Vivace, ever. So that's the theory. I would specifically like to talk about the combo that we have with Nectar, right? So I guess I'll put away all the other cards. For this combo, oh yeah, of course I have to talk about the trigger lineup. I'm gonna go quickly over the trigger lineup before I talk about the combo, and the PGs. So this is very, very standard. I'm gonna say the Elementaria with 3 PGs, nothing to really talk about. You need the Elementaria for the Luard matchup. You need the Elementaria for certain matchups. There's no way to revive PGs in this deck or anything, so this is a really stock standard. Blessed Favor is absolutely busted because giving 100 mil and a crit, so you can give 100 mil to a back row unit so it gets copied, and then you can give the crit to a unit that restands, so also really good. 3 fronts, so you can easily break 2 to passes, also pretty good shield, and you draw a lot of cards in this deck, so fronts are just good. 4 Insole crit. I think the Insole matters less in this deck. The timing doesn't really work out, but it could help you against prison and stuff, so I still keep it in. And then 4 regular crits and 4 regular heals. I don't do affect heals and affect other things. I don't like that. I think 15k in the early game is just too valuable. So I'm running basically vanilla crits and vanilla heals and everything, or vanilla heals in general. I don't really like just tech any heals that much. So we're keeping 4 vanilla heals for this list. So yeah, I wanted to just briefly go over it because there's not much to talk about. This is the best trigger lineup if you want to just go full consistency with Vivace. And now I think I'll just briefly show the full combo. So let's say you're on your Lianorn and you ride up into Vivace, right? So now you're in Unison Dress, you draw a card. Your board already had a token from before, that's for sure. So you can expect that you have your beginning token. Your drop usually has 15 cards in it. The reason that it has 15 cards is because you have the discard with this. You also have Elentis, which retires itself. So every Elentis you proc actually puts a card in drop. You have the Dragon. The Dragon Soul Blasts, and that puts your soul in drop. You also have the Cycler, which you will discard very readily to get another card. You also have the Order Package. So the Rousing Rasp is actually going to discard you 5 cards. And this is sometimes you go pretty, like if you open the Rousing Rasp and no Kutir, you might just use it. CB1, mill the top 5 cards of your deck, maybe put one of them in hand, maybe not. So this card can accelerate your drop. So for all these reasons in the early game, your drop is actually stacked. Now let's say all that is taken into account for. We already have 15 drop. Then we have the Kutir, or we have the Nectar in the hand. So this can work with either one, because one can search the other, and this one can just activate from hand. All we need is a Resonance Dragon, a Luster Impact Dragon, boosting the Resonance Dragon. The reason you want this column is because it's 28k. This is 15, and this is a 13. The other card we have is Fairy, so Fairy should be in the front row. And if you want maximum power, you do want an Elentis in the back row here. This one doesn't matter that much because the power gain from like Elentis to a token on a Vanguard swing won't matter that much, but the power gain on this column will actually matter quite a bit, as it's going to be an extra 8k power to the rearguard swing, so that could actually bother your opponent a lot. So if you have this exact setup, you do need to open CB, so we're going to use our heels over here to represent our CB. This is the full setup. Now, you will likely get into this setup because these two cards are played early. This card is non-mandatory. It could technically be anything, so keep in mind that this doesn't have to be there. And this card, you need to get it at some point in the game. So it's either you get it off the Mythiarch, which means you can't use your other orders, or you just keep it and you don't play greedy, but you also have 2 copies. So sometimes you see both, and you can afford to play one, and then maybe your opponent doesn't kill it. At this point, you can either activate the Kutir, it could be the plant token that you retire, or you can activate the Nectar from the hand, straight up. You will activate the Nectar, you will put it onto the Fairy. At this point, if the Fairy, if we're not on Persona Ride or anything, and we only have 15 cards in drop, and it's like a very like minimum, like lowish turn, then we will give 15k and a crit to the Fairy. The Dragon will still be on 15k. So let's do some numbers here. The first swing will be with the Resonance Dragon, boosted by the Luster Impact Dragon. So this over here is going to be 28k to Vanguard. Fairy is going to be boosted by Elentis for the next swing. This is going to be our second swing. Fairy is going to copy the power of Luster and add it to itself. So because Fairy is 8, 8 plus 15 is 23. 23 is going to be added to by the Nectar. The Nectar is going to be 15. So that's going to be 38. And Elentis, when you're in Unison Dress, is going to be a 13. So 13 plus 38, 51k. So you're going to be swinging with 51k with 2 criticals. Then you're going to be swinging with the Vanguard. So first things first, this procs the Luster Impact. Because everything stands and then re-rests, then the Luster Impact actually stood. You're able to Soul Blast a card, draw a card, and give it plus 5k power. So the Luster becomes a 20k booster at this moment. So now let's count up all the power. We have 13. 13. This gets a 5k because you boosted a total of 3 or more times. So it's actually 18. 13 plus 18 is 31. 31 plus 8 is 39. 39 plus 15, so that would be 49. 54. 54 plus 20 would be 74. 74 plus 5, 79. And 79 plus 13 is 89. 89, 93? No, 92, right? So 92k. Approximately, right? You can sit down and do the numbers if you'd like to be I believe it's 92. So you'd be swinging 92k with 2 drives. Let's be modest here, right? You drove check, you got just like a critical. And let's say a PG. So this PG could be anything, but let's say you got the crit. What would you do with this? it doesn't matter where you give the power, really. If you give the power to the rearguard in the back, then the Rosarium is just going to copy it. If you give the power to the fairy, then the fairy just has the inherent power. So crit, I would maybe still give it to the back in case some defensive shenanigans from my opponent, and then I give the critical to the fairy. So these go back to the hand. At the end of the battle, you're going to counterblast 1, and you can restand 3 rears. Once you restand these 3, they also get plus 5k power. Alright? So the Vanguard's currently at 18. You could have also given it the trigger to make it 28. That's definitely a line. But the Vanguard's going to be swinging to your opponent for 18k with 1 drive. You drive check. Doesn't really matter what you get. Let's say you get nothing. Then you're going to be swinging with your fairy. Fairy is going to be copying the power of the dragon. The dragon got 10k from its own skill, 10k from the trigger, so it's 30k. 30k plus 8 is 38k. Lianorn's skill gave it plus 5, so that's 43k. And then 43 plus 15 would be... 43 plus 15 is 53, 58. Right? So 58k with 2 criticals. And then you'll be swinging with your Resonance Dragon. Got plus 5k from its own skill and plus 5k from Vivace skill, so it swings 23k. And then at the end of the battle, you counterblast 1, and then you'll be able to restand your fairy again. And your fairy again swings for 58k. So this combo is obviously insane because you're retiring this at the end of the turn, you're countercharging 1, so your opponent can't even deny you. This obviously goes into the soul because of its own effect. So you end on this, and to be honest, the combo could be a lot stronger. The way that you get the combo to be really, really, really strong is to be on Persona Ride, of course. So if you Persona Road, I don't know if I have my Persona right here. If you're Persona Road, everything would be plus 10 in the front. So all those 7 attacks would have an extra 10 on top of them. The other thing is that Nectar is not capped. There's no limit to how many cards you can have in the drop zone, technically. Like, there is a limit, an upper limit of, let's say, 50 or something. But the real, like, it doesn't have to be 15 or exactly, and then you stop and you get 15k in a crit. No, this could be 20, 25. I've given ridiculous amounts of power to my fairy. I think I've made my fairy like 120k power column. So this is really stackable. And let's say you're not able to go for this, then another play that I recommend would be Double Fairy. And Double Fairy is really nice because it's the biggest 6 attacks you can do. Sometimes the Resonance Dragon attacks don't feel as good as a Double Fairy. And the way that you could really max this out, of course, is by having, again, Alentis to have the biggest boost possible. And then at this point, you definitely want to activate the other order, which would be In Search. So In Search can back up the Luster. And then on all of these swings that were happening, then the Luster will be getting an extra 5k every single time. And by the end of it, it's going to get an extra 30k, so that the fairies are copying like 25, 30k added on top of that. And if there's Persona Ride, then this just gets really, really big. And if you get like triggers, of course, on top of the Persona Ride, on top of the extra power that you're getting, then your guy gets super big. Super big. So that's the Vivace deck that we have for the new meta. I think it's really exciting. I think it has really good matchups, really big hand. The ceiling is, there's just no real way of telling the ceiling because you can play super conservatively and keep a lot of hand, or you could just drop this and your opponent like just doesn't know what to do because it's just so much power on your fairy. Just like being able to stack this and attack 3 times with this card, that's like around 50, 60k, like easily. Makes this deck really viable in this meta. And it has an early game, it has a going second game, it has a going first game. So I'd recommend you guys check it out. Try to see what you can innovate maybe with the list. There's perhaps better cards you can run from Festival Collection, like the new Grade 2s, that you could perhaps consider. But for me, this has been really working against some pretty viable decks. If you guys have want to share any thoughts, please leave a comment and let me know. Have a good one, guys. I'm out.